Well, good morning, Burnett Church. It is so good to be back with you. I hope you are enjoying your week. We are having such a fun time in this series called The New World. Pastor Tim has absolutely been crushing it in our series on the Sermon on the Mount. It has been so good. It's been blessing me. I hope it's been just so encouraging to you as we continue to work our way through these passages. It is fantastic. One announcement I want to let you know just before we get into our service is that we have a sisterhood event happening on June 10th. It is going to be a luau and it's going to be so much fun. So I hope you sign up. I hope you're interested in it. You can do that online or on the Church Center app. And if you need anything at all or more information, just send us an email or send Mel an email, melissa@burnettchurch.com. But let me pray before we get into service. God, would you meet us in this moment? God, would you come and bring transformation in our lives, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, that we can pause for a moment and say, have your way in this place. In your name I pray, amen. Well, church, let's get ready for a great service.
People that come together, strangers, neighbors, blood is one. Children of generations of every nation of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth: God is madly in love with you. Take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh, 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 oh. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in His blood. Light of heaven, friend forever, His kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth: God is madly in love with you. Take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh, 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 oh. Swing wide, all you heavens. Let your praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with a breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Swing wide, all you heavens. Let your praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with a breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh, sing wide, all you heavens. Let your praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with the breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before him. So open up the gate, way before the King of Kings. God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain. Sing of the world, his blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain. Sing of the world, his blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before him.
If you haven't met before, my name's Tim, and I'm one of the pastors here on staff. You're joining us in the middle of a conversation about the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' sort of most lengthy recorded single message in the book of Matthew, where we have decided to look at it through the lenses of a new world. That when Jesus came and he started to teach and he started to invite people into his kingdom, that it wasn't just a nice bunch of philosophical ideas, but that Jesus was actually trying to break in and interrupt and change our lives and change the world. And so the teachings become vitally important for us. We've looked at, so far, Jesus redefining blessing in the Beatitudes, Jesus redefining the church as we talk about salt and light, Jesus challenging the way that we understand the scriptures to know them through him. Last week we looked at Jesus challenging our standards, and that sometimes when we read simple things in the Bible, we're the ones who are looking for an easy way to stay as close to, well, sin as we can, not pursuing actually the standard that Jesus has for his people. Those statements all start with, "You've heard it said, but I tell you." Each one of them a callback to Moses and to the commandments and to the law, and Jesus himself standing in front of all of these people on a mountain just like Moses would have stood, and in essence saying, "I'm replacing Moses." A wild idea for his listeners. And today we continue on. There are 6 of these "you've heard it said, but I tell you" statements. So we dealt with 3 of them last week. And we deal with the final 3 this week, and then we'll finally be through chapter 5. Whew. This topic this morning is one that has come to burden me quite a bit over the last, I don't know if it's been years, certainly months. It seems pressing and real in our world right now. And I'm going to suggest to you that these last 3 things that Jesus highlights are all issues of character. And that in the kingdom of heaven, character matters deeply. I find this to be so burdensome, so important because, well, frankly, it feels like everywhere I turn, there's a lack of character, especially in our leaders. I don't know how many of you have come to me over the last number of months and said, hey, Pastor Tim, did you hear this podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill? How many people have listened to that? Yeah, I know a number of you have come and asked, what's your opinion about this podcast? If you don't know, it follows the rise and fall of a church in Seattle that was planted and started to reach out to lost people in that city. I was flabbergasted, by the way, when I went to Seattle a number of weeks ago when the border opened up. Now, I've spent time living in downtown Toronto, in many urban environments, and I have never been in as alternative an environment as downtown Seattle. I mean, even for a guy who loves cities and loves urban life, and I was a mess, a wreck. It was so like everything coming from all directions. And here's a church that comes in and with a fairly fundamental theology says we're going to stand in the middle of this culture and build a church. There was something beautiful about the attempt. There was something deeply flawed about the character of the leadership of the church. And it broke a lot of hearts and caused a lot of issues in the midst of doing some very good things. But it causes people to question and wonder about Jesus and his church. As a leader of smaller churches, church plants, I've been in places where I gave authority and leadership ability to people to, for instance, lead a small group on our church's behalf. You know, we're just this little, if you don't know what church planting is, if you haven't been around the church for very long, church planting is like trying to start a church from scratch. It's like entrepreneurial pastoring. Okay, so myself, my wife, and our 2-year-old daughter at the time moved to downtown Toronto with absolutely no friends or no people and said, you know what? This place that we've been planted needs a church. And we're going to start to behave like people of Jesus and hope to find other people of Jesus and hope to convince some other people who aren't of Jesus to become of Jesus. And a church would grow up out of this culture. So we got to the exciting point where it's like there's too many people to meet in our little condo apartment that we were living in. And so we would empower some other people who we've been on the journey with. And instead of rising to the occasion and living the life that they knew that they should live, these 2 single unmarried people decided that they would start sleeping together, which creates a big problem for the pastor who empowered them to have the authority to lead the group. Because they were clear and we were clear that that's not the kind of behavior that they would have. I've had volunteers who were so deeply invested in their way of doing things that they couldn't make space for other people to grow and flourish. Not the way leadership in a church should be. And I'm sure that you, many of you, I know in talking to many of you, have stories of your own where the principles of the kingdom and the reality of the leadership you've been under don't go together. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? There seems to be this interesting dichotomy at times in the church. People have come to me and said, yeah, but Pastor Tim, okay, so we want people who are full of character at the expense of capacity or talent. Like if you had to choose somebody who has great character or great talent, just to be super clear, I'm not going to belabor this point very much, I choose both. Because I believe that as people of Jesus, the gifts that we've been given are ours to steward and ours to grow. And that it's not acceptable for a person who's been given talent by the master to bury it in the ground. And while we pursue that, we can't value somebody's talent over their character. They have to get married together. In this passage that we'll look at now, Jesus is going to challenge our ideas about what it means to be a person of character. And as he does so, let me remind you that we've been looking at ethics through Jesus' lenses from several different points of view. There's this idea that God gave us an ethic from above. There's this idea that an ethic, comes up from wisdom that we experience in our life. That there is an ethic of the kingdom that we strive for but haven't quite gotten there. And all of that gets wrapped up in the person of Jesus. Jesus is the only one who can fulfill all three of the ethical standards. And so with that in mind, let me read. This is starting at verse 33 in chapter 5 of Matthew's Gospel. Again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, what does this not mean? I've had people come up to me, or I've been in mid-conversation with somebody and got interrupted because I said, look, I swear to you. And they'll go, Pastor Tim, the Bible says we don't swear, and so you shouldn't do that. That is not what this means. Okay? What that is legalism running rampant. Right? It's a rule that we made up that isn't the actual intention of what the scriptures have to say. And I think we have to be really, really careful with that. In fact, the Sermon on the Mount gives lots of opportunities, if we read it wrong, to just create more rules that are more cumbersome, which is exactly the opposite of what Jesus is doing in every instance in the Sermon on the Mount. He's trying to actually expand and free. And so, to interrupt somebody and say, the Bible says not to swear, it's doing exactly the opposite of what we were taught to do when Jesus challenged our view of the scriptures, which is reading one wee little line and then creating a theology based on it. Almost always you will get legalism if you do that. Almost always you will get something counter to what Jesus was doing when he was trying to break down the Pharisaical and religious systems of his day. Almost always you will be untrue to what the scriptures are asking, because the scriptures are not asking us to create another bunch of rules. It's not asking us to become legalists. It's trying to free us from legalism. And so if you read that one little line and you create a way of behaving, then you probably shouldn't swear. Maybe it's a little bit more like, have you ever had your kids come up to you and really, 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 really promise to do the thing that they said they would do yesterday, but they haven't done yet? I'm sure it never happens at anybody else's house. Happens all the time in my house. It's supposed to happen yesterday. I called Layla out this morning. She's been hired to clean our house on Saturdays. It's a beautiful thing. Except when she misses parts of the house. And then you have to be like, Layla, could you go do that? Oh, I promise I'll do it later. No. No. Let's go beyond, I promise I'll do it later. What's really interesting about some people's promises is that we trust them inherently because of the person that they are. Have you ever met somebody who everything they say just seems to be like trustworthy? They seem so self-assured of everything that they're saying, that everything that they're saying, you believe. I'm sure you've never heard a politician like this. Right? Everything they say seems like, oh, that's so true. And then you fact check them and you're like, wait a minute. That wasn't true at all. See, what the Bible calls us to is not to be people who make lots of promises, who seem to be people of character and integrity, but to actually be full of integrity. Why would you have to promise anything if you're a person who always does what you say you're supposed to do? Why would you have to make that promise? And so Jesus' ethic for his kingdom, the ethic that we have not realized and we will never realize, I probably will say promises that I don't keep before the end of my life. In fact, I'll put money on that one. At some point, I will promise somebody here something I will do, and then I will forget, and I will not do it. So we don't realize full integrity and truth on this side of eternity, but we're to strive for it. We're to keep pushing forward for it, to strive for that life from beyond that Jesus calls us to, all the way out there on the horizon where Jesus is standing going, look, I've never made a promise that I didn't keep. You can trust me to keep my promises. And you, as my people, strive to be people of integrity who keep their word. It is a shame that anybody has to stop and wonder whether the things the church says are true or not. It shouldn't be that way. The next one of Jesus' warnings or statements, he says this, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." One of the great things about my kids getting older is that they're starting to like things that I like. You know, you go through that whole process with your kids where everything you watch with them is terrible because all they want to watch is Paw Patrol or Caillou. I know people have a visceral hate for Caillou. I know they do. People tell me all the time, "Yeah, that little kid Caillou, he's so awful." They want to go to the movies. You want to go to the movies and see, like, you know, the new Top Gun movie? They're not having any of that. "That's too scary for me, Dad." And so you end up going to see the new Sonic the Hedgehog 2 movie. It is not the same thing. Not by a long shot. But what's great is your kids get older as they'll watch things with you. So this year, it's been a big turning point for some of our kids. Our littlest girl, Mackenzie, for years and years wouldn't watch superhero movies with us. She wouldn't watch any of the Marvel movies, and our family loves them. We're all about them. We love watching them together, and she wouldn't watch. Now she does. So we no longer have this stress when everybody else in the family wants to watch Captain America again, and she won't watch it with us. Now everybody's on board, and everybody's happy to do it. It's wonderful. I have been introducing my son, Julian, to the world of Star Wars lately, because the Obi-Wan Kenobi series just started coming out. If you don't know this, it's very important. We've been waiting for it for years. We're going to see Darth Vader in all of his glory. It's going to be wonderful. I had to catch Julian up on the first 3 movies before I could show him the Obi-Wan thing, just so that he wouldn't ask me so many crazy questions about, "Dad, what's happening? Dad, what's happening? Dad, what's happening?" That is the one negative thing about your kids growing up and watching movies, is they ask you about them all the time. Which leads me to hockey. My son has started to watch hockey with me, which is like every Canadian dad's dream. Yes! Except he asked me really uncomfortable questions like, "Dad, why did those guys fight? I thought you weren't supposed to hit people. I thought that wasn't okay." I'm like, "Well, sometimes it's okay, son." See, that guy, he was a jerk, and he hurt that other guy, and so then a guy from his team came and hurt that guy because he was being a jerk to the other guy, right? Like, we kind of understand this. It's like the rule of law played out on ice, right? Have you ever heard this Rex Talionis? This is where we get rule of law from, right? It's the Roman way of law. And it's actually come to influence most of the way the Western world sees law. There is what we call commensurable punishment for a crime. So you can't come break into my house and steal something, unless you're a bear breaking into my shed. But you can't come to my house and break in and steal something without consequence, right? We have laws in place that say, if you do this, then you are accountable and this will happen to you. If I injure somebody and that person dies, then we have to figure out, was it manslaughter or was it murder? Because if it was murder, it carries a certain punishment, but manslaughter carries a lesser punishment. We have commensurable punishment for the things that we do, right? Hockey fighting is exactly the same. If you need to make sense of hockey fighting, it's commensurable punishment on ice. Jesus says, actually, commensurable punishment is not the way of the kingdom. Commensurable punishment is not what we're going to pursue as a people. Once upon a time, God gave the concession, okay, guys, you're not getting it enough. So look, let's just make commensurable punishment the thing for now. And I'll show you that this doesn't work. I will show you that commensurable punishment is not the way. And then Jesus comes and he changes the perspective. He calls us to something greater, something much more sacrificial, much more difficult, in fact. And he says, do not resist. But you know what? That sounds a little bit too passive. It's not really what's intended. Do not resist, would be like if somebody strikes you on the cheek, stand there and wait for them to strike you on the other one. You know what the Bible says? The Bible says, turn your cheek to them so that they could strike you again. It actually probably should be interpreted, be ready for an act of grace. When somebody slaps you on one cheek, be ready for an act of grace. What kind of act of grace? Well, since we put all of this through the lenses of what we know about Jesus, Jesus would say the ultimate act of grace was the cross. Think about these verses. Be ready for an act of grace. Do not resist an evil person. Think about Jesus standing before the Sanhedrin and Pilate. Be ready for an act of grace. Jesus being drug off to be hung on a cross. Be ready for an act of grace. Jesus mocked and spat on and tortured. Be ready for an act of grace. This is the radical kingdom standard. Fortunately, it's very unlikely that any of us will have to go to those lengths for an act of grace. But be ready. What thing in our life is going to require an act of grace from us? What thing in our life feels like, I deserve justice. I deserve my commensurable punishment. But really, as people of Jesus, we're called to an act of grace. Grace that sounds like this in Ephesians chapter 2, starting at verse 1. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air and the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us in Jesus Christ. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Guys, we're the evidence of the grace of Jesus. The people of the kingdom are to be a people ready for acts of grace. And the last one, verse 43, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. I'm going to come back to that line because it's confusing maybe. When we talk about love in the context of the church, it's always important for us to, because we're in a culture that says love looks like romance and says love looks like sexual fulfillment and says love looks like a whole bunch of things. But what does the Bible define as ultimate love? When Jesus calls his people to love, it doesn't have anything to do with romance. It has everything to do with him and his relationship as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's always bound up in the idea that God has been in love from the very beginning. and in a love that cannot be untangled, even is confusing and unfathomable in the way that these three come together to show ultimate love. This is the kind of love that we're called to. So when Jesus says, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, we are talking not about a romantic, flighty, sexualized love. We are talking about a rugged commitment to be with somebody as somebody who is for that person because we believe God has a redemptive purpose for their life. That's the kind of love we're called to. We are with people, no matter where they are, and we are for them, no matter how they behave. For them, not for their behavior, but for them, because God wants to change them through the interactions of our life with theirs. And so it means that to love your enemies, sometimes you have to be in places that make you very uncomfortable. Or you have to endure relationships that are very uncomfortable. The best example I can come up with is thinking back to those days when we were starting a church from scratch. And one of the things we did was we created this little arts movement collective thing in Toronto, and we would invite people to come and essentially have a party with us on Friday nights. We would have 3 or 4 bands come and play some of their music, and we would have several visual artists. And the whole idea was, hey, we want to bless the artists in our city. Why? Because the artists, where they go, do you ever notice that if artists move into town, the town and all the prices get more expensive? Gentrification follows the artists. You know, we can get into a talk about whether gentrification is always good or not, but let's just go with the idea that, you know, like the involvement of the city is, generally speaking, a good thing. So where the artists go, the city flourishes. Where the city flourishes, if the church is right at the center of that, wouldn't it be a great witness to the city? That was our idea. But these were not Christian events. Our church didn't put them on. Our arts collective, and it might sound like it's a bit of semantics, but it was very important to us because we had church here. If you want to come to church, we have a church. If you want to connect, we have that too. So, we would invite these people. Well, along the way, we encountered some people who were rather not fans of church. Very aggressive atheists. And one of them, one night when we had invited him to come and participate, he grilled me for like 20 minutes. Tim, is this a church thing? No, it's not a church thing, Luther. Are you sure it's not? It feels like a church thing. Is it a church thing? No, it's not a church thing. This is not a church environment. He's like, okay, so I got a song I want to do. I want to cover a song. Is it okay if I cover whatever song I want to? I said, Luther, if you feel like it's helpful to you and your band's brand and it'll support you, then we will do it. He said, it's called the 10 Crack Commandments. It's a Notorious B.I.G. song that we've reorganized. Now, I don't know, probably most of you have not. You're good Christians, so you've never listened to Notorious B.I.G. But let me give you an idea. The song had 18 swear words in less than 3 minutes. Okay? He intentionally chose that song just to see if he could push me beyond the limits to which I would allow myself to be with him and for him. Make no doubt, that's everything that it was about. I know you weren't there in the conversation. You're going to have to trust me a little bit. And I let him do it. I don't know whether it was good for his brand or not. I don't really remember whether people enjoyed his rendition of that interesting song or not. But you know what? Luther was the leader of a group of people who were hanging around us at the time. He was the most influential guy in a group of people who were all pretty angry, atheistic type of people. And I've said before, you know, I think discipleship happens not just after somebody crosses the line of faith, but we as followers of Jesus, we're discipling everyone all the time. We are showing them what Jesus looks like, regardless of whether they're at -9 on their relationship to Jesus or +9, right? Discipleship happens all the way along that continuum, with Jesus being, you know, a perfect 10 and, I don't know, the devil being a -10. I'm not sure if that works or not, but let's just go with it for now, right? All the rest of us, we're all somewhere in between. You know, so if Luther, as a very angry atheist, you know, how many steps away from God was he at the time? I don't know, like a 7. -7, there were a bunch of other people. around with him. Luther never made very many steps, but a bunch of the people he influenced, because of actions like that, started to come to our Bible studies, come to our church services when we had them. In fact, his best friend at the time, when he and his girlfriend got pregnant by accident and they weren't sure what they were going to do with the baby and they needed somebody to meet them at the hospital, they called me. It was one of the most humbling moments of my entire life, to be the one that might be called on. In spite of the fact that it seemed like we were so far apart, but the trust and the love were being built as we allowed ourselves to sit in places that weren't comfortable. You know, it's not my favorite environment. That's not my favorite song. I've never listened to it again. You'll be happy to know. But this is what I think makes sense out of the call to be perfect. Because here's what we know about God. God loves us all. Every single one of us, regardless of where we are today, regardless of how well we follow or don't. That doesn't matter to God. His love for you doesn't change. His pleasure in your activity certainly does change. His love for you does not change. And so we, as followers of Jesus, the behavior of people doesn't have to impress us. But we are called to love everyone, regardless of whether we agree with their behavior or like their personality or whatever other flaw we come up with for them. Our call as a people is to love everyone. Be perfect as God is perfect. Guys, as pastor at Burnett, my deep hope is that we are people who care deeply about character, because I think it matters. Because I think that when Jesus said, "You are the light of the world, and you are the salt of the earth," he meant it. And he, for some strange and bizarre reason, has entrusted each and every one of us who call on his name to be his ambassadors in the world. Every single one of us carries the light of Christ out to a dark and hurting world, and darkness does not overcome light. Amen? This is our call, and this is our purpose. And so, when we read this and we realize that the standard for character is very, very high, we take it very, very seriously. James chapter 3, verse 1. I had a really hard time flipping to this page earlier today, too. I even put a thing in here. It didn't work. Give me a second. Gotta get rid of this card. Open up. Anybody ever have this problem with the tiny little pages on their Bible? My big chubby fingers. Not helped by all the meat I ate yesterday either. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. I kind of expand that and go, look, if you're leading people, the standard should be pretty high. This year with the board, we spent an awful lot of time working on something really exciting. It's called policy. Policy is so exciting. Judy Dakin loves policy more than anyone else. I love policy more than anyone else. To be really honest, like the fleshly guy that lives in here just wants to be able to do what he wants when he wants. Yeah, right? But what happens when you do that is that you get Mars Hill. You get the rise and fall of a church. You get the rise and fall of pastors and leaders. And so I am deeply blessed by the men and women on our board who care enough about our church and care enough about me to sit around and talk about something as exciting as policy so that I'm protected. But it's not just me, right? Like, the board is accountable to the church, right? You affirm the board every year. You have a part to play in who is our spiritual leadership, who is responsible for creating the policies that keep us all in check. And the church is accountable to the church staff. If you want to lead something here at Burnett, we are so thrilled. We want to empower and release leaders like you wouldn't believe. Our heart's desire is to see you do the work of ministry and see the joy of Christ grow up in your life as you minister to other people. But that doesn't mean you get to do anything you want. There's accountability. there's structure, there's process, right? All those fun words, but they're there so that you're protected and the people you follow, or the people who follow you, are protected. So nobody gets to do life and ministry in the church without some level of connection and accountability to the staff. And the staff are accountable to me. And the circle is complete, right? This is what it looks like for iron to sharpen iron. This is what it looks like for a cord to have 3 strands and not be easily broken. We all commit ourselves to the work of deep character. And we all put our talents down so that God can use them how he sees fit. And I am convinced that when a church moves in that direction, when we get serious about that, when we're committed to it, and when we do the hard work of sharpening iron, the world is blessed and benefited through us. Our heart's desire is for us to do all of that hard work in the background so that when people come here, what do they see? They see joy, they see passion, they see engagement, they see life in the Spirit, right? Because we've been doing the hard work behind the scenes. So here's an invitation to be a person who's doing hard work with us, behind the scenes, for the benefit of the world around us. That's what all this is about. Jesus is building a people to bless the world. And this is how he's doing it, through the pages of the Scriptures, through the message in the Sermon on the Mount. Let me pray, and then we'll be just about finished. Heavenly Father, you set such a high standard in your Son. You've called us to be people of deep character. Help us to rely on Jesus. Jesus and his life and death and resurrection is the only means by which we might move forward to be the people that you want us to be the people that we long to be connected to you and in relationship with you in the way that you've called us to do it. So God, help us to trust and love Jesus more this week. Help us to be people who can be relied on, that our yes is yes and our no is no, that we are ready for acts of grace. God, give us the strength to eat humble pie when it's required on behalf of your kingdom. Help us to be people who love so deeply that we're willing to be with people exactly where they are, when they need us to be there. But God, not just to sit and to be passive, but to be there unto your redemptive purpose for them. We call on the name of Jesus to help us become the people that you would have us to be. And we pray in his name. Amen.
I'll raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I'll raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I'll raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I'll raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me.
I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive.
Well, church, I hope you enjoyed service as much as we did. We love you. We miss you. We hope you're doing well wherever you are. And we hope to see you soon. If you need anything at all, shoot us an email, info@burnettchurch.com. And I hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you soon.